From the Tchaikovsky Festival of 2013 to the Nordic Festival of 2014, the WSO's 2015 Fall Festival is dedicated this year to the music of Gustav Mahler. From October 23rd to the 31st, the WSO, in conjunction with the Winnipeg Chamber Music Society, the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra, Brandon University Orchestra, the Winnipeg Philharmonic Choir, the Mennonite Festival Chorus, and Cinematheque, explore the life and music of this notoriously brilliant interpreter, orchestrator, and inventor. Making his living as a conductor, Mahler's symphonies and songs were his divertissement and catharsis. Although his output may have been less prolific in quantity than some of his contemporaries, his energies were consistently distilled into a deeply emotional and refined language that has wrapped and will continue to influence musicians and listeners into eternity. WSO resident conductor Julian Pellicano visits the Classic 107 studio to give us the rundown of all things MahlerFest. Thank you for joining us, Julian.
Sarah, what can I say? It's an honor.
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to see you. It's so good. We haven't had to sit down in a while.
That's true.
But hey, in this journey of diving into Mahler's music, the first, the second, and the 10th symphonies are the offerings on the block this week. What has enchanted you most about the music since you've had this opportunity to really get into it?
Well, the amazing thing about these particular pieces that we're presenting is that the first and second symphonies are actually kind of like one big symphony in a certain way. They're connected, at least in Mahler's mind, and in some musical ways as well. And these pieces changed. They're kind of pivotal pieces in music because they changed what we think of as what a symphony could possibly be, and that's exactly what Mahler wanted to do. He wanted to create this new kind of symphony. And then the 10th is the other side of it. If Mahler had lived longer, this piece gives us an idea of where he might have gone, and it's actually kind of a grand departure from what we consider to be Mahlerian in many ways, and in many ways it's an obvious it's an obvious path. You can see it.
Well, for those of our listeners who aren't necessarily familiar with Mahler symphonies, what was that change? What was that shift that he made at the beginning of his career to change the voice of the symphony? Was it the sonic qualities? Was it the size of the orchestra? Was it musical ideas and how they were put together?
It's kind of like everything. The orchestra of the Second Symphony, for example, is more musicians than Wagner had even ever called for. So he's expanding the possibilities by expanding the number of musicians. There's almost an entire little orchestra off the stage as well. And then, and Mahler symphonies are very interesting in a way. They're kind of like, he sometimes almost uses like a collage technique in order to put the symphonies together. So they're in the form instead of a direct line. Sometimes there's all kinds of different music and influences coming from everywhere. So you'll hear like an Austrian Landler, which is like a folk dance, and then you hear this almost like bohemian gypsy music, and then some other kind of very sort of traditional Jewish music in his symphonies, and then something that sounds like Beethoven, and then Wagner coming in there as well. Like it's like kind of a mix of everything. And Mahler was incredible composer in one respect. He's one of the few composers we have that was such a renowned conductor. And he conducted, his operatic conducting schedule was about 3 times what the most busy conductor today would have been. So he knew operas from Mozart through Wagner. He knew them all. He conducted them all. And they all somehow made this beautiful, wonderful thing that we call a Mahler symphony.
Permeated that musical identity of his. Magical. So this week of Mahler begins with Mahler's Second Symphony tomorrow night and Saturday at Centennial. What can first-time listeners expect from the Second Symphony? Well,
if I can speak personally, the Second Symphony for me really is, in musical terms, a religious experience. It's a grand work. It's a grand journey. The expression is extreme, from the quietest of the quiet that you can possibly get to the loudest of the loud. That's just a very superficial example. But
it's not just for orchestra, though. We also have choir, a massive force of vocal power also, and in addition to a soprano and mezzo soloist, right?
That's right, yes. And these are not even, I mean, in Mahler's output, this isn't even the largest that he came close to. But I mean, these are for any orchestra. This is a very large force of musicians that is going to be playing. The amount of sound that they're able to make is quite large. And it really is a journey. I think all Mahler symphonies are a journey. In this case, Mahler is this piece, the Second Symphony, which is a continuation of the First Symphony, is very autobiographical, and I think that there is some programmatic quality to the music and what's going on, and I think that you can kind of expect it's almost a musical story in a way, but it's not. It's more abstract than that, but it's very clear, even to first-time listeners.
Excellent, and we will have the text in the program, I hope.
Of course.
Translations, great, wonderful. That is always encouraging. As a singer, I always need my translations. It just sheds a different kind of perspective. Also, for those of you who aren't aware, this is a substantial work. We're like pushing 80 minutes of music. So it is in one sitting, no intermission, for those of you who are wondering. But it is definitely worth the sit. Just make sure that you bring your lozenges.
I would say out of all the 80-minute long pieces that an orchestra could play, if you've never experienced one before, this is the one you should.
Brilliant. Well, I'm very excited. Then on Mahler's, okay, so the First Symphony, you keep talking about how the Second Symphony is a continuation of the First. Can you tell us about the difference in reception between the First and the Second Symphonies? We were talking about that a little while ago.
Sure. Well, the First Symphony, I mean, just to talk about how they were received by the public, because there's so much to say about these two pieces, but the First Symphony was kind of a disaster, and it went through many changes because of that, because Mahler, after its premiere in Budapest, it was really... it was not understood at all, and he lost a lot of confidence, and I think he changed a lot of things. For example, there was originally an entire other movement, the Blumein movement, which was taken out because it was criticized so harshly, and I think Mahler felt like, well, I tried to do something original here and it did not work, so we're going to take that. We're not going to do that anymore. And then he made a lot of changes, and in fact, he was making changes to his First Symphony all the way up until 1909, the last time he conducted it in New York, and at that time he was the most famous conductor in the world. So he kept changing these things. Anyway, so the piece was not received well. In fact, Mahler's friends in Budapest were avoiding him on the street, actively avoiding him because they didn't want to come face to face with him because it was so bad. The Second Symphony, on the other hand, the first three movements were played in Berlin, and they were somewhat successful, so they decided to have Mahler back to do the entire piece. In fact, that first concert the entire concert was conducted by Richard Strauss, but Mahler went up there to conduct his own symphony because,
amazing.
That's the way he was. He's not going to let somebody else conduct his piece. Not at that time, at least. Anyway, so when he did come back and he finally did write the finale and he did everything and he premiered the Second Symphony in Berlin, it got this incredible reception, and it gave Mahler this amazing confidence to feel like, wow, now I am validated as a composer. I can move people's hearts and people's minds with my music. I am going to go forth and not just be an incredible conductor, but also be an amazing composer. And I think he really set himself on that path. The problem is that the audience really loved the symphony, but it turns out that they actually didn't sell that many tickets, so they ended up giving away a lot of tickets to the conservatory students in Berlin and a lot of local musicians. And of course, from musicians at that time, they really loved the music. I mean, they really, as fellow musicians, they understood where Mahler was coming from, even though among the general public at that time he was somewhat misunderstood. Now, fast forward to today, 100 years later, and even your average someone who is not a musician, a professional musician, can certainly appreciate Mahler, and he's one of the most popular composers, one of the most recorded composers of the 20th century. So it's incredible how things change. But even at that time, it's kind of interesting how that went down.
It is pretty interesting. Now, before we go to a little bit of Mahler, we're just going to have a little mini intermission in this wonderful interview that we're having. He wasn't really a choral composer, really, but he included choral music in a lot of his symphonies, right? But as individual moments, he didn't really compose a lot of choral music. Sunday's concert at Westminster United Church, with the Winnipeg Philharmonic Choir is presenting choral works of Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Mozart, Shostakovich, and Copland, and it will be hosted by our own Andrew Ratuski, which is very exciting. And the morsel of Mahler that will be included on that program are some of his Rückert-Lieder from mezzo-soprano Monique Schulte. And I'm very much looking forward to that. We are going to play a little bit of Dieter Fischer-Dieskau with Don't Look at My Songs, Blicke mir nicht in die Lieder. Blicke mir nicht in die Lieder from Mahler's Rückert-Lieder, which will be featured on Sunday afternoon's program at Westminster United Church. The Winnipeg Philharmonic Choir featuring mezzo-soprano Monique Schulte singing these. It'll be brilliant and beautiful. I am in the studio with Julian Pellicano here in the Diamond Lane on Classic 107, resident conductor of the WSO, conductor of the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra, and he will also be conducting the Brandon University Orchestra in this joint force project of putting together Mahler 1 as well as Schubert's 8th Symphony, his unfinished. Julian, tell us why these two are paired together.
Well, in the final instance that Mahler himself conducted the First Symphony in New York in 1909, the program that evening was Schubert's Unfinished Symphony in B minor, Beethoven's Overture to Coriolan, and then there was an intermission followed by Mahler's First Symphony. And part of the reason why it's actually kind of there's a story involved here. Is that okay?
Please.
All right, fantastic. So it goes like this. When I was asked for the University of Manitoba Orchestra to be a part of the Mahler Festival, actually I didn't know it was going to be a Mahler Fest. I said, how would you like to have the orchestra be on the festival? I said, oh, fantastic. I'd love to. What is it? I said, it's a Mahler Festival. I said, Mahler, what are we going to do? I mean, we don't have... The University of Manitoba Symphony is, around 50 musicians, which is not nearly enough for anything that Mahler ever composed. So I spent months and months thinking about what we could possibly do. And I had this idea at some point to recreate a Mahler program, because back then, at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, programs were very different. Often the longest piece was at the beginning, and the second half of programs was a lot of short pieces. Right. In fact, Mahler ended most of his concerts that he conducted, the symphonic concerts, with the Overture to Meistersinger by Wagner, which would never be done today. And that wasn't an encore. That was actually on the program.
Wow.
So he conducted that piece, by the way, more than any other piece that he conducted in his life.
Wow.
So anyway, so I had this idea, and I was doing all these research on Mahler's programs. And then around April, I was driving to Brandon to conduct the Brandon Chamber Players, which is a fantastic group, by the way. And I was looking out over a field of something, and it struck me like a lightning bolt that the Brandon University Orchestra and the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra need to be put together, and we need to play a Mahler symphony.
That's amazing.
And Mahler's First Symphony is the obvious choice because we're doing Mahler's Second, and it also just happens to have the perfect instrumentation to put these two groups together.
So what is the size of this orchestral force now?
It's about 92 players.
Amazing. About 92.
Yeah. Because at the very end of the symphony, Mahler actually instructs you to have about the last minute of music. He says, get as many horns as possible. And so we've been somewhat in flux as to how many people. Like the longer this project goes on, the more people who want to join. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and he also says you can have trumpets and trombones as well.
Wow.
So
it'll be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
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 And this is happening at Jubilee Place on Monday night, right?
That's right. Jubilee Place, Monday night, 7:30.
Excellent. And then on Tuesday, These are some other events that are going on later on this week. Tuesday, Cinematheque is screening Death in Venice. The Winnipeg Film Group is putting that on. $9 general admission, $8 for students and seniors, and $6 for members. This Death in Venice, loosely based on a character that could have sort of been maybe Mahler-ish, named Gustav Aschenbach. Apparently, the Adagietto from the Fifth Symphony, very notably present in this film. Also, on Wednesday, October 28th, at the Muriel Richardson Auditorium at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, the Winnipeg Chamber Music Society will be playing Mahler's Piano Quartet in A minor, a student work of his, the only real surviving morsel of his chamber output, really. Also on the program, Richard Strauss's improvisation, Opus 18b for violin and piano, Schönberg's Verklärte Nacht, Transfigured Night, something early Schönberg, this brilliant undertone of transfiguration, I guess, of changing and of understanding and of kind of tragedy and love that comes out of it. And also, yours truly, me, Sarah Jo, singing with David Burrows some Wolf Mörker Lieder, just a journey from the beginnings of love into a poor, heartbroken, lost girl. And those would be really fun. That's Wednesday night at 8 p.m. at the WAG. And then Thursday at Centennial Concert Hall, we have a lecture and reception from musicologist Norman Lebrecht, a blogger of Slipped Disc 1D. Right. He has a new book out, Julian, about Mahler's 10 symphonies and how they've changed the landscape of orchestral writing. Right. Yeah. The book, I'm not sure how new it is, but it's called, I believe it's called Why Mahler, 10 Symphonies That Changed the World. And Norman Lebrecht, I mean, is a figure in the classical music world. And he's a scholar, he's a musicologist, he's a writer, he's kind of an everything. Mm-hmm. And he's been talking about music very intelligently for several decades. Mm-hmm. He has a long and esteemed career. He's done documentaries, written books, and I don't think it's unfair to say he's maybe perhaps a slightly controversial figure, but I think that's fantastic because he's saying something, and he's he's going out there and he's having people discussing this wonderful art form. Yeah. And that's what any art form needs, is healthy discussion. And it's fantastic. It's an honor that he's coming to Winnipeg. That is Thursday at 7:30 p.m., $35 limited seating at Centennial Concert Hall. And then we finish next weekend with Mahler's 10th Symphony in its reconstruction, right? Because he didn't complete that 10th Symphony. That's right. Yeah, he did not complete it. The reconstruction that we are playing next weekend is the most famous and most notable one, which is done by the musicologist Derek Cook. Mm-hmm. And Mahler, the funny part is that people thought that there was basically nothing because after the Ninth Symphony, right, and after Das Lied von der Erde. Right. But then these manuscripts were discovered, and Alma Mahler, Mahler's widow, was suppressing them, and Bruno Walter, the conductor and Mahler's protege, did not want these pieces to be let out, and eventually they were. Mm-hmm. In the I believe it was 1950s or 60s. It took a lot of haggling to sort of figure it out. And then for a long time, people only played the Adagio, which is the first movement, which is the only movement that Mahler actually fully orchestrated. Okay. And then once Derek Cook had an opportunity to look through all of the sketchbooks, he realized that, in fact, while they were truly sketches, there were so many notes on orchestration that perhaps it would be possible to do a reconstruction that would be come somewhat close to what Mahler would have done. And this is by far the most famous and most well-known version of the 10th Symphony. Of this avant-garde side of Mahler. Absolutely. Yeah. So exciting. Where would he have... I mean, it really shows us in a way that, that we can hear in this piece very clearly why all of the modernists, Schoenberg, Berg, Webern, and others, were so interested in Mahler, and why Mahler was so sympathetic to them, even though Mahler's music itself is extremely relatable in many ways, in ways that Schoenberg's music sometimes is not. Mm-hmm. I mean, I hate to say that, sorry, but early Schoenberg, yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, the mid period Schoenberg, like the 12-tone serial Schoenberg, yeah, of course. But I mean, this is that moment where he pushed It was that last
Yeah.
push into the musical future.
And in fact, the expressionism of the Verklärte Nacht that the Winnipeg Chamber Music Society is going to be playing on the 28th.
On Wednesday, yeah.
Is totally there in the 10th Symphony as well. And it's an incredible expression of music and of the zeitgeist of the time and everything. So
brilliant. MahlerFest runs this Friday, October 23rd until Halloween the 31st with 9 nights of brilliant music, film, and discussion centered around this remarkable creator and interpreter. Don't miss a moment of it. Individual tickets are available for all events, or you can catch the whole festival at a discount with festival passes starting at $79, or student passes are available at a song for $49. For more information about the festival or to purchase tickets, go to the WSO's festival website, wso.ca/MahlerFest, or you can call the WSO box office at 204-949-3999. Julian Pellicano, resident conductor of the WSO, conductor of the UMSO, and this week the Brandon University Orchestra, featuring Mahler 1 and Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, as well as all of this brilliant music that is happening this week. Julian, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Sarah, it is a distinct pleasure to see you, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Likewise. Okay, we are going to play you out on a little bit more Rocketlieder, again from Dieter Fischer-Dieskau. Ich bin der Welt abhanden gekommen, one of those timeless moments in Mahler's oeuvre. I just can't even. Let's do it.